seemed to sort of just be doing their thing, and suddenly they got people listening to them.
Stop making the eyes at me, I'll stop making the eyes at you.
No, I mean, the reason I like the Arctic Monkeys is because they sound so Manchester. I think it's fantastic. You know, it always reminds me again of the Mondays, you know, Stone Roses, all them lot, the best. So it's nice.
I bet that you look good on the dance floor, don't know what you're looking for.
This is the band you've got to love. This is the band you're going to love. And you tell people that enough times, people start to believe it.
Well, I bet that you look good on the dance floor.
I don't think the Arctic Monkeys need that much advice. You know, they've got a pretty cool attitude towards it. They're remaining themselves unfazed, you know.
They seem pretty level-headed.
They seem pretty unimpressed by fame.
I wish you'd stop ignoring me, cause it's sending me to despair.
I think they want to prove themselves as a decent rock band, not a one-trick pony, not a sort of a buzz band of the year.
Well, I bet that you look good on the dance floor, dancing to electro pop like a robot from 1984.
They came from nowhere to rule the charts, storm dance floors, and shake up the music industry as we knew it. And yet the band themselves hardly batted an eyelid. This is the story of the Arctic Monkeys and how they became a phenomenon almost without trying, and sometimes almost without knowing. The band first came together in the High Green area of Sheffield after childhood friends and neighbors Alex Turner and Jamie Cook asked for guitars as Christmas presents. Shortly after, Turner enlisted Andy Nicholson to play bass, and Matt Helders found himself behind the drum kit simply because it was the only instrument in the band not taken. With that, the first lineup of the Arctic Monkeys was complete.
They were still sort of 16, 17. I think that's pretty much is the trend. I mean, like most people do get interested in music at that point and start developing their own tastes. So the fact that they formed so young in itself isn't necessarily so phenomenal or strange, but the fact that they came on so quickly and made so much progress so quickly, that was particularly interesting.
The city of Sheffield has a long rock history. Although it has always had strong links with electronic music, thanks to Cabaret Voltaire, Human League, and the Warp Records label, it has also spawned such names as Def Leppard and Pulp. But the Arctic Monkeys have relatively little in common with that lineage. Instead, the world beaters in waiting were more inspired by the friends around them who had formed bands.
There's always been a very lively scene in Sheffield and in South Yorkshire particularly. There was particularly guitar bands. You seem to get either guitar bands or electronic-based bands. I think they kind of snuck up behind everybody and just suddenly appeared on the scene.
There was a real passion there. I mean, a lot of them were playing the local clubs, and it kind of went from there. I think everyone was spurring each other on. It's you know, it's an exciting thing. You know, it happens everywhere sporadically, but Sheffield, you know, had its turn.
The Arctic Monkeys came out of a scene that was being slugged the New Yorkshire scene. Guest bands like Kaiser Chiefs and Franz Ferdinand were before them, but they were really the ones that came and put Sheffield on the map in that sort of North Yorkshire scene. With them, other bands like Reverend and the Makers, bands like that who they basically put the focus back on at that point.
They all kind of influenced each other very slightly. With the Arctic Monkeys, there was very much seemed to be a clear agenda from the start, that, you know, it was very much singing about, you know, what was kind of happening down their street and in their evening out and what have you. And the interesting thing in terms of influences, they didn't really seem to sort of know who they'd been influenced by. Certainly Alex was in my early kind of conversations with him, when he would say, you know, who did I think they sounded like? And I thought, you know, they sounded like there was bits of maybe the Kinks in there, and there was bits of MC5, there was all sorts. There was maybe, you know, there was Ian Dury and the Blockheads in there, and then somewhere in there was this sort of northern thing going on, and he reckoned he hadn't heard of half these bands.
The pre-signed, you know, early landmark gigs, but when they first headlined the Lead Mill in Sheffield, I mean, they talked about, you know, when they were boys going there to watch a band and finally getting to headline it. And when they did headline it, they sold it out instantly. So you know, they obviously had a big fan base at the time, so I think that was a real seminal moment for them as far as, you know, I mean, they played around the local, you know, pubs and clubs, but, you know, the Lead Mill, I think, was the landmark one.
As they began to build a live reputation for themselves during 2003 and 2004, the band laid the foundations for something that would radically change the way bands found an audience. The Arctic Monkeys chose to give away a selection of their demos to gig goers. The hope was that fans would become increasingly familiar with their material and help create a better atmosphere at future shows. It wasn't long before this tactic began to pay off handsomely.
They particularly had a unique kind of take on watching bands who would quite often say things like, you know, at the end of the gig, they'd say things like, well, we've got some CDs on the sale, they're only £3. I think they found that a little bit repulsive, and they felt that they didn't want to be, you know, there's another band that does that, you know, kind of like sells themselves in that kind of blatant way to people who probably aren't interested anyway. So they circulated demos, and the internet by then was pretty much an everyday thing for people who are into music. So these fans, I mean, it's a simple extension of word of mouth, but word of mouth via file sharing and MySpace. But the common misconception is that they had a MySpace site that was set up by them. It wasn't, it was set up by their fans. And that was particularly what helped circulate their music and made people familiar with their music before they even released a single.
I remember them saying they came off stage and they were just blown away by the reaction from the fans. People even then knew their songs, singing along to the words. A few months later, I think they were playing the Forum in Sheffield, and again, that was very significant because the whole crowd knew every word to every song that they played. They hadn't released anything by this point, they'd just been giving out free demos at the gigs. People had been swapping them, copying them, putting them on the internet, and they said from that point they knew that, one, the internet was going to be their best friend ever, and that they were really going to be something special.
The internet, I think, well, particularly obviously MySpace, got them that audience outside of town. I mean, and really the word spread. I mean, it was just perhaps at the time the biggest and best advert for what MySpace could do for your band. And suddenly you got, you know, kids in Japan, you know, singing Mardi Bum and singing these sort of phrases and what have you that they had no idea what they meant. And yeah, I mean, it was. No one, including them, could have predicted how the internet would drive the whole thing. And I think I mean, you couldn't really say it was responsible for their success, but it certainly initiated it, and certainly it got the music out there in a way that no record company at the time could have hoped to do. It would have taken a colossal budget to get it to that many people so swiftly. That kind of created this kind of fan base, still fairly underground, but still very much in place, very firm. And that fan base definitely connected with Alex Turner's lyrics, because it was being written by someone who was very close to their age, like pretty much late teens, and it was about the experience of being young, being into music, being intelligent, and being from a city like Sheffield, which is a city that's replicated across England and Britain many times over. So that's essentially where the seeds of their success started, through their fans championing their music just because they liked it.
Finally, in May 2005, the band issued their first official release, the now fabled 5 Minutes with the Arctic Monkeys single, on their own Big Bang imprint. The 2 tracks showcased all of their strongest assets. The A&R stir they had been creating previously now turned into frenzy, and despite the slew of interest from the majors, the band opted to sign with Lawrence Bell's independent Domino label. Whereas many of the big boys had been trying to persuade them to alter and compromise their music in exchange for larger amounts of money, the Arctic Monkeys were more interested in the idea of complete artistic freedom.
I think the way Arctic Monkeys did it with their marketing and using things like MySpace, although they still claim to the day that was set up by a fan of theirs, the MySpace site, but they obviously believed a lot in file sharing and letting fans promote them for them. I don't think any of the record labels are going to go out and burn their marketing budgets just yet. I think, you know, they're not going to suddenly devote 100% of their time to the internet, but I think certainly it made record labels and the industry think, we can use this. This is another string to our bow in terms of marketing. It gets smaller bands to the height of fame quicker, and it gets the word out there quicker, which is obviously what it's all about.
I think it frightened the life out of the industry. I think they know the record industry was obviously aware of the internet, and it was, you know, there was downloads, and they were, at the time, I think they were more worried about fighting illegal downloads and file sharing. I think suddenly when they realised that this band, by design or accident, could suddenly reach audiences on the other side of the world with minimal cost, I think it really fired a rocket up the backside of the industry, and I think they've had to become more aware of that, and they've had to change, and obviously with diminishing revenues and marketing budgets within the record industry, they've had to look at what the Arctic Monkeys did, and you know, obviously ever since there, every other band wants to kind of utilise it like that, and obviously a lot more bands have become more DIY, and I think, you know, I think it's probably the change is still being felt, but I think it will herald a lot more strength for independent labels and bands just doing things totally for themselves and slipping the reins of the big corporates.
The summer of 2005 saw them play a rapturously received tour of the UK, topped off with an appearance at the new band tent at the Carling Weekender, which proved to be one of the event's major talking points. Because their music had been circulating amongst the fans for many months, the entire crowd sang virtually every word, and it was clear to see that stardom beckoned. Just 2 months later, their debut single, Proper, I Bet You Look Good on the Dance Floor, hit the shelves, and the Arctic Monkeys had really arrived.
Stop making the eyes at me, I'll stop making the eyes at you.
Musically, it's just a great pop song. It really is. It's got a fantastic chorus. Spits out the lyrics so fast in the verses. It's just brilliant.
When you've got Tom Jones covering it, it's you know it's pretty successful. But yeah, I personally think, you know, Certain Romance or 505 is, you know, their best songs. But that's personal opinion.
Public absolutely loved that song. I mean, it went insane. It went to #1 in the charts. People were downloading it, swapping it, file sharing it. Everyone at Kerrang Radio was talking about it. We hadn't even started playing it ourselves, and everyone was talking about it. You've got to hear this band. We were passing it amongst ourselves. Don't tell anyone. Everybody was doing it, so everyone wanted to hear this band. Who were they? This is incredible. So it was the best advert they could ever have done for themselves, I think.
It's something that they experience week in, week out, every Friday and Saturday night. It's the experience of seeing someone who you lust after, but knowing that that person knows that you're lusting after as well. And it's the interesting exchange of you know, looks and suggestions and all the rest of the things, all that kind of courtship, all that kind of Saturday night courtship that happens all the time, everyone experiences. Again, nailed to the absolute point of exactness in terms of Alex's kind of wry, witty, satirical, you know, portrayal of that experience.
They're singing about stuff that, you know, kids on a night out in Oslo will be going through, or you know, Osaka, or you know, wherever you go in the world, whatever city, there are kids being sort of dodging the police and getting into trouble, you know, tripping up outside shops and, you know, sleeping in shop doorways and, you know, all the rest of it, and having trouble with girls. And so yeah, I was slightly surprised, but as when you sensed that everybody was catching up with what was happening on the net and the buzz that was already there, we just kind of thought, well, this is an inevitability. This is gonna be #1. It's all gonna be colossal.
Well, about that, you look good on the dance floor. Don't know what you're looking for romance for. Don't know what you're looking for. Well, about that, you look good on the dance floor. Dancing to electro pop like a robot from 1984. From 1984.
After about the third time I heard it, it was single of the year 2005. No danger at all. And I don't think anyone looking back in 50 years' time or whatever will listen back to the music of 2005 and think there was anything better than I Bet You Look Good on the Dance Floor in terms of singles.
For a debut single to hit #1 was impressive enough, but the band's impetus had yet to reach anything like a peak. The follow-up single, When the Sun Goes Down, again reached the top spot, and their debut album, Whatever People Say I Am, That's What I'm Not, was easily the most anticipated musical event of the year. Even though many early versions of the songs had already been released for free, the album still broke records in the UK by shifting over 360,000 copies in its first week, making it the fastest-selling debut in British chart history. Whatever People Say I Am, That's What I'm Not summed up the experience of being young, intelligent, and hormonal in modern Britain. It was clear that the Arctic Monkeys were speaking to a generation like no band had done for years.
Said, who's that girl there? I wonder what went wrong so that she had to roam the streets. She don't do major credit cards, I doubt she does receipts. It's all not quite legitimate. What a scummy man. Just give him half the chance, I bet he'll rob you if he can. Can see it in his eyes, yeah, that he's got a driving ban among some other offences. And I seen him with girls of the night, and he told Roxanne to put on a red light. It's all infected, but he'll be alright, 'cause he's a scumbag, don't you know? Said he's a scumbag, don't you know?
Debut album of Arctic Monkeys was a phenomenal success. It was actually quite frightening how well that album did for them. The world went mad for it because they'd been told for so many weeks, months, this is the band you've got to love, this is the band you're going to love, and you tell people that enough times, people start to believe it.
I think it's a great debut. I don't think it's consistent necessarily, but when it is on its game, when it's at its peak, there's not really much that will touch it in terms of British music.
When it first came out, and in that first week, obviously it was shifting phenomenal amounts, and we were being quite anarchy about it. We were getting the figures on a day-by-day basis, and we were writing a major piece in the paper every single day because, you know, Sheffield obviously knew the band, and the record was flying out, and it was clearly became evident by the middle of the week that this was going to go to number one. It was going to be the fastest selling debut album of all time.
The Arctic Monkeys on their debut album were very much into a bit of a theme running through it. They picked 5 or 6 tracks which basically told the story of a guy that they knew, a guy that we all know, who works during the week, works his what's off during the week to earn enough money to go out at the weekend and get absolutely wasted, hang out with his mates, pull girls, get in the odd scrap here and there, get in trouble with the police. And they're basically 5 or 6 songs told the story of his week.
The album title is Whatever People Say I Am, That's What I'm Not, which is taken from a classic British kitchen sink film called Saturday Night, Sunday Morning. And I think if there is a theme to the album, and I think there is, I think Saturday night, Sunday morning, those 4 words are essentially it. Red Light Indicates Doors Are Secured. It's one of my sort of favourite tracks on there, and Riot Band, because I think they're very reflective of that period of the evening or whatever they're singing about. I think it really, for atmospherics and for a sense of place, I think you're right there, and knowing that the city very well. And the kind of nights out, they're sort of talking about on here, it's perfect.
They say that once in every sort of 10 years, a band comes across and they're going to be the next biggest thing. But, you know, in this day and age, a lot of it's, they'll sort of set you up to knock you down almost, you know. But, you know, Arctic Monkeys sort of lived through it because they had the songs. It was as simple as that. They had the songs, you know, the lyrics, you know. The guy's a poet. you know, he was saying stuff that everyone was feeling at the time, and it wasn't necessarily like a social thing, it was an observation, but it was almost taking what the streets were trying to do or are doing and putting it in an indie format, which, you know, just works so well.
It is the experience of, again, the experience that unites so many young people of going out or preparing to go out on a Saturday afternoon, the experience of going out on a Saturday night, and then the come down and the reassessment that happens on a Sunday, which can be very sobering. It can be quite amusing, but for the most part, it's a come down.
It was a good album. It was a good album. It was, judging by them from the first single, it was exactly what people expected of Arctic Monkeys. So I think buying it, people were like, this is great, telling all their friends, it's exactly, you like that single, you will love this album.
I can name certainly my favourite songs. I mean, it's not too difficult for me. I really enjoy the Arctic Monkeys when they're at their most kind of visceral. So A View from the Afternoon is great. It's a fantastic track. I think, you know, and again, obviously people had known them by then, but also people have known, like, I Bet You Look Good on the Dance Floor and Fate Tales of San Francisco, but they still stand out. I think they're still like my favourites, certainly two of my favourites on there. And but I think in terms of when it sort of